Without any further ado, I'll hand over to Kamil for his presentation.
So good morning, everybody, and welcome to IATA's AGM in the sunny Rio. It's a beautiful place to have an AGM, isn't it? I'd like to ask you all to be a little bit patient with me because my slides changed at the last moment. I'm not pointing fingers, okay? But it's so I'm a little lost with tracks. I don't know which way to go, so be patient with me just a little bit. So let's kick off. Of course, we're briefing about Africa and the Middle East. We're talking about Afghanistan, Iran, all the GCC countries, Iraq, Levant, and Africa. Okay, so let's kick off. Africa and the Middle East sits in the crossroads of pretty much everything that's happening, and I think you can see, if you monitor the media, how aviation has been pretty much all of this year focused in what's going on in the Middle East and in Africa. There's a lot that happens, and I confess that when I look at how aviation has withered and stood against times, you realize immediately how resilient aviation is as an industry, and how it manages to cope with fluid situations continuously. Having said that, we look at the aviation industry as a strong, resilient, and on international traffic, high exposure to external shocks, okay, and the increasing complex geopolitical and operational environment. And you have to be inside an airline to see all this transpire almost at the same time, yet the airlines have managed to survive and go past these hurdles. If you look at the projected passenger growth after what's happened in the region in the past, let's say, 3 months, you can see that our predictions that we did in 2025 for 2026 has been revised, and we have 3 scenarios. Whether it is the high growth scenario, mid growth, or low growth for both Africa and the Middle East. In all 3 scenarios, they're positive growth, with Africa reporting 3.9, projected to be 3.9 in 2026. That's the high growth, and 3.2 on the low growth. Okay, this is from 2024 to 2050. And for the Middle East, on the high growth scenario, is 3.5 year over year, and 2.5 in the low growth scenario. Can you move that? Yeah. So obviously the crisis had a negative impact, but specifically for the Middle East region. Okay, so if you look at March and April numbers, you can see a negative. A massive negative impact on the GCC carriers. And I'm sorry, but I can't actually see the numbers, but it's minus 59.2%, I think, in March, and 46.8% in April. And of course, that's contributed. That amounts up to billions of dollars worth of losses for the GCC carriers. All right, so the impacts on the Middle East carriers, obviously airspace closures, about 10 countries that had to close their airspace, some for up to 70 days. Kuwait, for example, was closed for about 70 days. Fuel prices, that became global. GCC did suffer significant fuel disruptions, supply disruptions, because some of the refineries were actually struck, and then they had to shut down these refineries, which means the GCC themselves had issues getting fuel supply, plus the fuel prices have gone through the roof. Demand and impact, generally with most of the O&D traffic that's going through the GCC countries, Dubai and Doha specifically, got impacted. And so most of the transit passengers through the O&D traffic was impacted. And capacity constraints, so while you took out a large number of airlines for a couple of months, there was constraints, whether it is because of the availability of equipment. They were all grounded, all the aircraft were grounded within the region, or the prices of fuel that impacted the operational cost of some of the airlines and the availability of fuel. So all had a negative impact on the Middle East airlines. So the Middle East is a story of resilience. Africa's untapped potential, and we'll go through it now. Okay, so blocked funds. You know, I'm getting pretty famous for just talking about blocked funds a lot. And in the recent Focus Africa event that we had in Addis, I actually put down an example of what it costs for an airline to operate from A to B, and how the airline has to pay in advance most of the costs, and then ends up waiting a year or two before they get their money. And in most cases, that currency is depreciated, and then it records a loss for that particular route. It has a tremendous impact, and I can't stress enough how bad, how damaging blocked funds are on airlines. So when you look at the blocked funds in particularly in AMI, Africa, the Middle East, you'll see it's about 98% of the global blocked funds. That's huge. So 756 million, give or take, depending on which day of the week it is. And that's a lot of money that's owed to airlines that have already operated the flight and paid the cost for it, whether it's fuel, maintenance, flyover charges, landing fees, and so on. So this money gets blocked from the airlines for a significant amount of time. The highest blocked fund we have right now is Algeria at $160 million and climbing. We also have Lebanon, which is a legacy blocked fund. It's been there for a while because of the collapse of the financial Lebanese lira. And we also have Mozambique. These three are the highest. We have engaged with Algeria heavily and intend to continue doing that, hopefully to resolve all the red tape that they have that's blocking the fund. It's not because they're short of hard currencies, in fact, just difficult to get your money out with all the paperwork that's needed. And each state has its own logistics that we have engaged with heavily. Eritrea being the only one that is virtually impossible to engage with for political reasons. And we've tried, and it's just very difficult to engage with Eritrea. So Africa's priority. There are two particular priorities that I've singled out here. One is improving the safety, and then the second one is making aviation more affordable. So improving safety, if you look at I hope you can see what's in front of you. You can see that actually Africa has improved in 2025, and quite a significant improvement. And I think that's a positive first step, but we're not there yet. So I mean, although we should be thanking ourselves and saying, okay, this is great, but we still remain at 7.86 accidents per million flight, which is way higher than the rest of the globe. And we are engaged with most of Africa on all the issues related to safety, but more is needed from governmental entities to play a role in improving the safety. So the financial challenges that Africa face. The first one is the profitability. With wafer-thin profit margins, anything that can happen in your daily operations will take you into the negative. Unfortunately, that's the way it is in Africa, and it's predominantly because of the unbelievable charges and costs to operate in Africa, whether you're looking at the fuel, the charges for the infrastructure, the maintenance costs, financing of aircraft, If you want to lease an aircraft, it's far more expensive. Taxes, charges and levies, and so on. Across Africa, the momentum is building up, and this is a positive message. You can see Africa changing, you can see it's evolving, you can see it improving, but it's just, in my opinion, not fast enough and not good enough. The intent is there, the capabilities in Africa, definitely, okay, which is just a matter of having collaboration with the relative stakeholders and getting the governmental part of these stakeholders to understand the value of aviation. So if you look at the government policy support essential to unlock the opportunities of aviation in Africa, the first thing that I noticed over the last 5 years is getting the relative Ministry of Finance or Transport and so on to understand how much aviation contributes to the economy of a country. And actually that is probably the biggest roadblock that I've noticed, because you will find that an example is the Transport Ministry would understand that, but the Finance Ministry wouldn't, and so the Finance Ministry will come up with new regulations that actually hamper the growth of the aviation industry in that particular country. The other one is the oversight, which is always shocking to me. So when you look at the standards that we have in IATA, if you want to be an IATA member, you have to pass AOSA, and you have to pass AOSA 100%. You can't get 99.9% and expect to get AOSA certificate. It has to be 100%, and it's a tough audit. Whereas in civil aviation, who are responsible for the oversight of the aviation industry in that particular country, doesn't even aim to achieve 75% compliance with ICAO standards, which always shocks me. And there's a number of reasons for that, but the biggest one, I think, is actually the know-how and the understanding of the importance of the oversight and the ability to do it. So we are actively engaging on launching a couple of projects to assist in that. The other thing, obviously, in Africa is the unbelievable charges and taxes and levies and so on. You'll see things like Tanzania adding an IPNR charge that's $45 one way, okay, whereas world standards is about $1.6. So I don't understand why Tanzania is trying to milk a security requirement that they are obligated to do and charge it onto the airlines at $45 one way. So they effectively added $90 for a round trip in and out to Tanzania, which is completely unacceptable. And then, of course, you need to get the governments in Africa to understand that they should prioritize aviation because it does contribute to the state's GDP. Middle East priorities is capacity building and regulatory harmonization. Go on. So if you see that you can see Middle East operations is very safe at the moment, okay, and they maintain that really high standard, okay, and they do have good civil aviation with good understanding of regulations and good capacity to do the oversight. What would be nice is when you get the GCC countries to combine together so they can have a single harmonized regulations for licensing and aircraft operations and maintenance and so on, okay, and it aligns to the global standards, making it far more easier for airlines to operate within the GCC states and internationally. One of the things that we noticed that's popping up in the GCC is the consumer protection. The way it's done generally in the GCC, it pops up first. We know about it usually at the end, so there's very little consulting with IATA. And then we engage and try to simplify it. It tends to be very restrictive in the start because the people that are doing it don't particularly understand what it takes to operate an airline, but they are more focused on the consumer protection end of their regulations. We've seen Saudi, UAE, Oman, Syria, Morocco, and Egypt all come up with different versions of this, and we've engaged with them. So in some cases, after they release the regulations, and managed to convince them to rethink the regulations and kick out a more user-friendly standard for the airlines. So pretty key priorities to sustain growth and resilience in the Middle East is support the reintegration of states from emerging sanctions and so on. The two countries that bounce into mind is Iraq and Syria right now. So we're fully engaged with Iraq. In fact, we have consultants in and out for the last 2 years assisting the airline and the regulator to catch up with 30 years of lost growth and understanding. And we're also midway in engaging with Syria on the same thing. On our radar is also Libya once it gets off the sanctions and so on. And we're very active with this, generally trying to build out both entities, the industry itself and the regulator, hand in hand, so that they can work together, catch up, usually from being out of the game for 30 or odd years. Collaborative to support the vision of seamless air traffic management. So IATA has excellent capability for air traffic management, which is surprising. And generally, they operate behind the scenes. Not many people actually understand how much IATA does when it comes to air traffic management. The objective, of course, is to make sure that air traffic management is first safe, and then the next is efficient. And IATA generally plays behind the scene roles with all the entities to try to improve the air traffic management system. And the last one is promote fair and appropriate consumer protection regulations, which I already touched on previously. So that's pretty much it for me. I want to just highlight a couple of things. One is I would like to highlight that one of the things that IATA does also behind the scenes, it has been, for years, IATA engages with ICAO behind the scenes when there's a crisis, specifically in the Middle East region. So there's a lot of years of experience because of the number of crises the region's faced. So there's a group called the CCT, which is Contingency Coordination Team, which is handled in collaboration with ICAO. So ICAO handles the civil aviations, while the IATA handles the airlines, and then ICAO and IATA sit together and work out the safest next move. It's been 3 years of continuous 24 hours CCT activation for obvious reasons, and the men and women that have been on this from both parties, whether it's IATA or ICAO, have been exceptional. These things that happen behind the scenes. Most people don't know what's going on, but I mean, and recently, so from the end of Feb till recently, in fact, till a couple of days ago, at least I can vouch for the IATA team. They've been engaged 24/7 with no days off, monitoring the airspace, and communicating with the airlines, civil aviation, making sure that under these difficult times, the airspace is managed safely. So I'll open up for questions and answers.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll take one question per journalist and try to keep it as brief as possible so I can go around the room. Sorry? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, all right. Let's start with Bezavit. Go.
Thank you very much. This is Bezavit from Addis Fortuna newspaper, Ethiopia. I wanted to know, IATA is calling for cost of efficiency. Already African countries, airlines are expecting 12 to 15% higher cost in tickets. So I wanted to know what are the specific that IATA is doing in the Eastern Africa, specifically with the Ethiopian governments to buffer this, because the Ethiopian Airlines is building Bishoftu Airport. It's the biggest, and it is being built in debt, and it has to pay. So what is the question for this? Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm not going to just pinpoint airports. So in general, I'll take your question in general. Yes, the charges are higher in Africa. The costs are higher to operate. It starts from trying to get money to buy a first aircraft. It's more expensive. If you lease an aircraft in Africa, it's more expensive. The landing, the parking, the flyover charges, The API PNR charges are ridiculously high in Africa. Okay, and then you have things like the fuel, which is far more expensive in Africa than anywhere else in the world. Maintenance costs and availability of spares and the supply chain, same thing. So there's stuff you can control or can negotiate on, and there's stuff you can't. If the fuel's gone up and it contributes to about 30 to 40% of the cost of an airline right now, there's nothing IATA can do about it. But when you have a country that wants to charge $45 API PNR charge when it shouldn't exceed $1.6, $1.8, that's ridiculous. Okay, so then we go in aggressively and we try to educate the decision makers first to make them understand what the costs are. In Ethiopia's case, it's an impressive airline, knows how to negotiate pretty much all of its operations. It has impeccable planning, forward planning. You're absolutely right, building the airport, which is going to be one of the biggest airports in Africa. And yes, it's they're taking loans to cover this. And I know the figure, but I cannot share it here. It's a huge loan, and I know they secured the loan, and they're moving forwards on this. And that's a positive way. This demonstrates a country that understands how important aviation is in contributing to its GDP.
Oh, sorry, I'll go on. Mark?
Thank you. Hi again. Thank you, Kamil. Great as ever. Mark Billing from Arabian Aerospace Aviation Week. Kamil, you talk about resilience. You've always had for the Middle East carriers, understood. But this is a different war. This is a different conflict. It's a shooting war, and unfortunately, there has been incidents of missiles and drones hitting targets in the GCC countries. So it's different this time, is what I'm saying. So where do you rank this top crisis, if you like, in terms of global shocks for the region, and how fast can it recover?
That's actually a very good question. 3 days ago, a little longer than 3 days ago, Kuwait airport got hit after it was renovated literally because it got hit, right? And now, so Kuwait Airport Terminal 1 is out of action, and I think it's going to be out of action for at least a year because it was hit really hard. But that's what we see on TV. But the fuel farms were hit also, and the fuel supply pipelines from the refineries to the fuel farms were hit, and some of the runways were damaged and taxiways were damaged. That all means that it's going to hamper the aviation industry, particularly in Kuwait, unless they can do either full restoration or let's say patchwork of fixings. And this is no different than Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE. Okay, Saudi's been relevantly untouched when it comes to aviation, but the rest of the GCC have actually been impacted, including Iraq. What you notice that because the industry itself is resilient, the initial impact in March was you had a lot of passengers that got stranded in different locations, weren't able to go home, and had to find alternatives. And so you'll see the industry when there's a gap in one place, the other airlines around different regions then cope and pick up that gap. And you'll see that there's a fundamental change in how the European carriers and the Far East carriers have started to reroute some of their equipment from one location to another, making up that gap. And eventually, I think when the GCC countries find some sort of calm, they will have to scramble to try to get some of those passengers back through their respective hubs.
Yeah, okay.
Hello, Hugues Honoré from Agence France Presse. I would like to elaborate on my colleague's question on Gulf companies, Gulf airlines. They are being supported by very powerful public shareholders, and they've been trying to get away from that with commercial revenue, of course. But now they will have to get capital in order to compensate losses. How far can this model go, according to you?
So I think so there may be a bit of truth in what you're saying, but it's not absolutely true. Most people wrongly assume that these airlines are fully supported by the government, funded by the government. They don't make any money, and every time that there's a crisis, they get refunded. But in fact, if you see some of the documents I've seen, and some of the P&Ls I've seen, in most cases, these airlines actually have to take a loan from the banks, okay, to go through their tough periods, like Corona, for example, and then end up paying them back as soon as possible. If we pick on the UAE carriers, they're all profitable, all of them, okay, and all the airports are profitable. So it funds itself. So it's not the picture that you assume it is, that they need to be supported. There are some airlines that take loans from governments. So some of the less prominent airlines in the GCC that take very low interest loans from the government that they have to pay back. But in general, they are commercial entities that operate on a commercial basis and have a P&L that is readily available. You can see the loans and what it costs to operate through their P&Ls.
Karen, I'll go left and right and center.
I would like to know if you can perhaps just give an indication of what you see as the biggest challenge at the moment, given the global situation for Southern Africa and South Africa.
This is so it's a beautiful question, and I don't know if you heard it, but I like that question because most people that are not African think Africa is one country. It's actually 54 countries, and literally 54 countries. There's hardly anything common between them. And when she says the southern countries, she's talking about SADC states, that's 16 countries. And even in the 16 countries, although they are closer together than the rest of Africa, they are still 16 separate countries with 16 different problems. The intent that we have to launch some of the initiatives for safety specifically, we've singled out for the SADC states for logistical reasons only, not because we favor one country over another. And we find that these 16 countries are more commonly closer together to work on stuff like standardizing the state safety program between the 16 states, or ensuring that we conduct ramp inspections, safety inspections on the ramp for the 16 states, airports, and so on. These are on the blueprints at the moment, with a lot of subject matter experts from IATA looking on how we're going to implement this at some point this year. We'll trigger it off this year. But again, to answer your question, the 16 states, I think, are the ones that we're able to probably progress really quickly with, hopefully within the second half of this year.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this is Mabiha from CNBC India. Talking about the impact that the war has had on Middle Eastern carriers, could you give any statistics on how much has been the financial impact and how much capacity has been hit when the airlines had to shut operations, and also how safe it is now to operate, though we see airspace getting closed whenever there are strikes? So how safe it is for passengers also to fly from the Middle Eastern airspace, or airlines to fly when there are strikes happening?
Yeah, thank you.
So for the airspace, yeah, I mean the last airspace was closed with Bahrain and Kuwait about 2 o'clock in the morning their time because of some rockets going in last night. For the other part of the question, hopefully will release that information tomorrow.
The outlook it will be presented tomorrow.
Yeah.
Vinod, go ahead. Vinod.
Hello, again.
Hi.
Hi. I'm from Oman, so Oman has been relatively unaffected by the closure of airspace. But if you see the flight radar, the Oman airspace has been busy. So how do you see Oman handling this situation? Because most of the flights have been rerouted over Oman.
Yeah. So, something I usually forget to do is praise 2 particular countries, which is Saudi and Egypt, for their incredible ability to manage the airspace when it gets congested because 10 other airspaces are closed. So suddenly and I know the number, so Egypt jumped 480% more traffic in within 3 hours, and they were able to handle that efficiently and safely, and so did Saudi. Oman demonstrated in early March, all of March, that capability too, and they worked very closely with us, and it's incredible to see how well they handled it with almost no obstacles. So it's impressive that Oman managed to handle that airspace and with that amount of traffic back quickly. But don't forget, after that small period of within a couple of weeks, most of the fleets in the GCC were grounded. Okay, so the traffic sort of dropped to almost zero. In fact, the only airlines that were operating were the ones that are going, international flights are going in and out of Saudi through Oman, okay, and Oman air carriers themselves. So yes, they did an amazing job, but also, don't forget the traffic then dropped to almost zero.
I'll take one more from this side.
Thank you, Kerry Reels with Flight Global. You said the GCC countries would have to scramble to get passengers back through their hubs. First of all, how do you anticipate they will do that? Do you think they will sharply reduce fares to stimulate demand back that way? And secondly,
Sorry, just one question, is that all right? Or is it a follow-up
it's part
question?
of the same
Okay.
question. And secondly, what if they can't get passengers back through their hubs? What could the longer term impact of this be on their business models?
I don't think they have to scramble, because you're talking about decent airlines that most people particularly seek. Okay, so I don't think the UAE would have any trouble, because they are almost 50-50 now with O&D and point-to-point traffic. So it's a matter of months before they get their traffic back. The same applies to Qatar Airways. It's the size of their network and the ease to travel, and the quality of the airline plus the quality of the airport. So I don't think they would have to try too hard. But I mean, it is a point. There is a point where they would have to start seeking to get back to their original numbers before February this year. Which I mean, they do have. They consciously, when I say scramble, maybe I used the wrong word. They consciously have to chase this traffic back again.
Khalid?
Mr. Kamil, will the Middle East region be affected by Lufthansa Airline announcement by canceling 120,000 flights during summer season?
Will the region be affected by? Sorry, I didn't hear the rest of the question.
By canceling Lufthansa more than 120,000 flights in summer?
No, because okay, so I mean, there are a couple of things we have to consider. Okay, when an airline's deciding to operate or not operate with the current conditions, is the region stable? Is my destination stable? Should I be selling tickets 30, 60, 90 days ahead of time? That's one. Number two, the cost of operation and the availability of traffic and the demand to operate. And number three, the yield that's going to produce in comparison to another yield that I could use this aircraft for, right? So those three considerations need to be taken at all times. So when one airline pulls out, another airline will step in, looking at it, which might serve that airline better. So I don't think that the capacity drop in the region will affect the ability of passengers to travel whatsoever. I think if you see how, you have to look at it globally. If you see how the airlines move around each other, when one pulls out, another one steps in. And it's been like this. That's why I say the aviation industry as a whole is incredibly resilient.
Lindsay?
Hello, it's Lindsay Shooters from Daily Maverick in South Africa. So the South African aviation industry finally saw some stability and economic improvement post-COVID, but then this new crisis hit. So how severely are current energy security issues and fuel costs impacting route viability and overall cost competitiveness in the region?
Yeah, South Africa is a different ballgame, huh? So when I say Africa is 54 different countries, South Africa is the 55th different country, and South Africa has a whole ball of different issues happening at the same time. I think if you look at how South Africa's aviation industry has coped over let's say from Corona, it's bounced back quite well. It has its own logistics, specifically with the air traffic management and the airport markings and approach certification and procedures, which they're going through, even though a little bit slow, okay? I'm still impressed with Africa, recording one of the highest numbers in ICAO's oversight audit, you saw. And I think Poppy Koza is the superstar for that. But also, I think, there's a lot of room for improvement within some of the coordination between different entities within the government in Africa to improve the airports, the ANSP, and how to handle South African Airlines.
Dina?
Assalamu alaikum, Dina Kamil from the National. Good to see you, Kamil. Just a quick question on how higher fuel costs that the airlines are recording have been passed on to passengers in terms of higher airfares, and what that is doing to sort of test the limits of passenger demand. So looking at that picture, I'm just wondering how long do you think those high airfares will be sustained, and what that means for the overall picture for summer travel.
Thank you, Dina.
Just what if demand will hold up?
Hey girl, long time. All right, let me get back to it. Let me answer it. So obviously, the airlines don't control the fuel, okay, and you have to be conscious that airlines sell the tickets 30, 60, 90 days in advance. So when the fuel jumps, like it's jumped here, you know that this airline is operating the flight at a huge loss, right? It has no choice but to pass. It doesn't want to pass the cost to the passenger because it would like to sell every single seat. So it has to pass the cost to the passenger, or it won't make any money. And yes, that then bites into the number of passengers that can afford that particular flight, right? Your other question is how long? If I knew that, man, I'd be a millionaire. Okay, because how long is the fuel going to be that high? And if I knew that, I'd be hedging and trying to make money off this. Okay, so it's going to be several months, and so while the cost of the fuel is this high, with the highest that we've ever seen, obviously the tickets are going to be high, and hopefully and it impacts the whole the whole industry. It's not one region, not the other region. Maybe Africa more because of the availability of fuel, but that's the cost of the ticket to make sure that the airline can survive.
Thank you. Our time is up. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'll be outside if you want to try and catch Kamil for a few more minutes.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.